Welcome, everyone. My name is Agnes Chong, and I'm an assistant professor here at CUHK Law and chair of the Environmental, Energy and Climate Law Cluster at our Center of Comparative and Transnational Law. We are delighted to welcome Dr. Jägerskog here for our inaugural session of the academic year. Dr. Jägerskog is Program Manager of the Cooperation on International Waters in Africa Trust Fund and the focal point at the World Bank for Transboundary Waters. His work primarily focuses on Africa and the Middle East. Previously, Dr. Jägerskog was Counselor for Regional Water Resources in the Middle Eastern and North African region at the Swedish Embassy in Amman, Jordan, and was also Director of Knowledge Services at the Stockholm International Water Institute. Dr. Jägerskog had managed the UNDP Shared Waters Partnership, which facilitates and promotes dialogue and cooperation on transboundary water resources. Dr. Jägerskog is Associate Professor Docent at the University of Gothenburg, where he focuses on global water issues. He worked for the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs at the Embassy of Sweden in Nairobi and at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Dr. Jägerskog has a PhD from Linköping University, Sweden. He has published over 100 articles, book chapters, and reports on global water issues. There is tremendous interest in Dr. Jägerskog's expertise, and it's a great honor to welcome him to speak to us. Thank you, Dr. Jägerskog, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to give us the seminar. I understand you're usually based in Washington, DC, but at the moment you're traveling and speaking to us today from Helsinki. So Dr. Jägerskog will speak for around 45 to 50 minutes, after which we will have around 10 minutes for Q&A. So please send me your questions via the chat box in advance. And without further ado, I will hand over to Dr. Jägerskog.
Okay, thank you very much, Agnes. It's a pleasure to join you all here today. Indeed, I am traveling, and as you saw, Agnes, I had got the times mixed up. I think there was a change in moving from winter to winter time here in Helsinki. But it's a great pleasure to be with you, I will try to share my screen to start the presentation. Just one moment, if you bear with me, and let me know, Agnes, if you can see this. I'm trying to get it in slideshow mode. Can you just confirm that you see it, Agnes?
Yes, I can.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to spend some time primarily focusing on transboundary water management in Africa and the lessons we've learned through the work that we're doing there. I'm managing, as Agnes was highlighting, and thank you for the introduction, Agnes, the Cooperation on International Waters in Africa Trust Fund, which is a World Bank Trust Fund supported by 6 development partners, Sweden, Netherlands, EU, the UK, Denmark, and Norway. It's been running for some 10 years. For those that are interested, you can Google civaprogram.org or go to the website. You'll find lots of information about the program. I will, of course, try to provide some here in the overview presentation, but if you're interested in learning more, that is all available on the website. But before sort of digging into the African continent, I wanted to provide a little bit of the sort of the global outlook, if you like, on why transboundary water engagement is necessary, needed, and probably more than ever, not least given climate change, the fact that we have increasing number of people on the planet needing to share a pretty much constant amount of water, and in some places, given climate change, And it's actually interesting that this is happening. This lecture is happening at the same time as world leaders are congregating in Sharm el-Sheikh to discuss challenges. Among these the water challenges and how they are related to climate change. So in the international and global perspective, there are some 310 transboundary river basins, some of which have agreements, but only around 1/3 of them do have some type of agreement or framework of some sort. So many of them do not have that. So that's a challenge in and of itself. Oh, I'm sorry. Then if we look at transboundary aquifers or shared groundwater systems, there are only a handful of agreements, and those transboundary aquifer systems are even more profound and increasing attention, given that basins are closing, as we say, meaning that all the water or more is already allocated. Attention will and have in dry areas turn to focus on groundwater management, and it's really an issue that concerns the whole world, and around 50% or so of the world's population live in basins that are shared. And going forward, I think there are certain risks, but also development opportunities. We focus on the positive side that can be captured by focusing increasingly on the joint management of these transboundary systems. And of course, and I think you've already, those that are a little bit familiar with this may have heard that we will see increasing conflicts over water in the coming years, and this has been something that's been highlighted over the last couple of decades. At the same time, I think what research has shown us much through the work of Oregon State University, which has collected all developed a database with all the transboundary agreements, showing really that much of the interaction so far, which is perhaps counterintuitive, has been on the cooperative side. But I think that actually speaks to the fact that countries do recognize that they aren't interdependent, mutually dependent on the same resource. What I do on my side will actually affect you on the other side, and vice versa. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind here, and also an explanatory factor as to why we actually do see more cooperation on transboundary waters. That's not to say that we often don't see a bit of both. We do see a bit of conflict, not violent conflict, but conflicts around those resources at the same time as we see cooperative activities. And I want to sort of connect back to some of the discussions that are going on at the global level. We just had the annual meetings of the World Bank Group and the IMF, where a lot of the focus from the shareholders, meaning basically all of the countries of the world, asked us to focus increasingly on global public goods, meaning those goods that are supplied and are beneficial to all of us. It goes beyond a particular country, perhaps, and focusing on those global public goods will be important and is likely to be an increasing role for the World Bank coming out of this. And here I'm highlighting a few of those global public goods, which are actually in a way global public bads right now, but could be turned through increasing support to global public goods. I mean, the climate change is front and center. As soon as you turn on the television now, especially now with COP going on in Egypt, everyone's talking about it. The need to address this is as strong as ever. And the way that we can address it through an institution like the World Bank, but of course also with other partners, is going to be important. And addressing climate change, of course, includes lots and lots of different sort of entry points and aspects. But one important one is transboundary water management. With climate change, and I think we see this unfolding already across the globe, but perhaps most pronounced in some areas in the Middle East and North Africa, where climate variability over the last years have been seen to, well, there's always been there, but it's been increasing quite a lot. And if you think of an agreement of on a transboundary resource, a transboundary river, or a lake or aquifer, if you see them, and then you will see that some of them are based on volumetric allocations, meaning that, you know, country X gets a certain amount of million cubic meters, country Y gets another set of million cubic meters. But this is, of course, based on multi-year averages of water flow in the river. But that rarely happens it rarely happens anyway, but increasingly less now with climate change, because you see, you know, larger fluctuation, even if they're, you know, over a 10-year period, maybe, you know, equal or somewhat equal amount of water flowing, seen as an average, the highs and the lows are increasing. So that's just one way that we need to look at transboundary agreements and you know, where they do exist and improve them so that there is a bit of more inbuilt flexibility. I think focusing on water issues is also related to another global public goods, overcoming pandemics. The way that the COVID crisis has unfolded put at least some focus on water supply and sanitation and the need to provide that for people as a way of keeping healthy. That's another aspect. Fragility, conflict, and violence is unfortunately on the rise in the world. We see it in our programs in Africa. Most of the countries we are active in, or at least you know, a large part of them, are characterized through the World Bank set of parameters as fragile. And we realize that at the World Bank, we need to be engaged much more in this. And we also argue that supporting and working on transboundary cooperation, bringing countries together, not only decreases the risk of conflict, but it also allows countries to provide water, basic services, which is an important part of the social contract that keeps a country together. So those are some of the aspects that sort of are linked directly and indirectly to the ongoing global discussions on the increased provision of global public goods. And in the case of transboundary water management, if you think of it, it's perhaps not a global public good. It can contribute to that, but it's really a regional public good. If you get the countries to work together, the public good aspects of this is often of a regional nature. It's not only the specific country, but it actually contributes to the region's well-being at the same time. I talked a bit about the risk, but some of the opportunities, and I want to highlight you know, a few of the opportunities here. If we can improve our cooperation globally, and I'm speaking mainly about Africa here today, but globally, it has a range of opportunities. One is it will help us to promote water security and achieve water security. I highlighted that when I talked about that transboundary water management can lead to increasing water services in fragile contexts, for example, which is an important part of water security and really of the social contract in many of these countries. And the SDG 6, which has an indicator on transboundary water management, which will be important. But it's not only related to SDG 6. I think it goes way beyond and actually touches upon many of the other SDGs as well. Another aspect is that it would facilitate investments. We did a stock taking the last couple of years looking at the World Bank investments in transboundary waters management, and the figure that we're having here is that 25 million of World Bank investments were influenced or informed over the last 20 years through support to transboundary water management. But this has a specific methodology which I won't go into, but this is an important aspect which the countries, not least in Africa, are asking for as well. It delivers climate action. I mentioned that when I talked about the global public goods aspect. So this is an important part of the equation as well. It again strengthen resources of resilience in fragile contracts, can diffuse tensions, and build really the social capital over time. I think having worked in the Nile, and I've been leading the World Bank's engagement in the Nile over the 5 last years or so, and or was also engaged previously. What we've seen there is an important aspect. The fact that, through development partners coming together and the countries coming to the World Bank to ask to support, and the support has been running for roughly 20 years or so, you see that there's an important social capital that is being built. So really the networking between the experts and professionals from the different countries, which is in a way an intangible, but at the same time is important when one tries to advance investments or cooperative plans over a shared resource. And this is important in diffusing conflict and reach more cooperative solutions. It furthermore supports regional integration, which I think is important, which is important in order to move further on regional integration, not only for the benefits of water, but really for an economic growth and development. And it also finally highlights the possibilities to link in other sectors. Often, perhaps too often, we engage in our sector. For me, it's water, but actually there are so many links to food, agriculture, to energy, to transport, and so on and so forth. Health also, not least highlighted through the COVID pandemic over the last few years. So I think there is the sort of the support that we can provide and work with the countries to achieve, and actually allows for this cross-sector collaboration and planning on shared rivers and so on and so forth. I will touch a little bit on some of the more concrete aspects of that later. I think I've highlighted this already in terms of sort of our internal understanding of why cooperation is important over transboundary waters. It actually helps us manage our risks in different geographies, as much of investments that we are supporting, not through water projects, but through other projects, are either indirectly or directly dependent on those transboundary resources. If we manage then not we, but if we support the joint and cooperative management of those, I think that decreases the risk for our portfolio. Importantly, it's not only that was an internal aspect to the World Bank, but likewise, and even more important, is that many country development plans, long-term plans, are also dependent on water, not for all aspects, but for many aspects. And if you work together with your neighbors on the shared water resources, you will be better off, and you have more security and decreases the risk and are able to capture those development opportunities more effectively. I want to highlight here also some of the aspects. We talked about this multi-purpose, but here you see some of them. I won't go through all of them in detail. But really, it is some of those aspects relating to energy, to environment, agriculture, social inclusion, and so on and so forth that are possible to derive from this support. So, ending the sort of the global overview. Excuse me. We talk about more tangible provisions and the positive outcomes of cooperation and of the support, and those are relating to investments, of course. It also is related to those aspects that I touched upon: water security, energy security, public health, ecosystem quality, biodiversity, benefits, and so on, that has been achieved. The more intangible, I also touched upon those, the sort of the trust, positive perception between the country representatives in different basins or sharing groundwater systems, is some of the more intangible, but equally, if not more, important aspects. The capacity that's been built at the national and the regional level is also important. It strengthens the human capital. And I think the long term, and really not only thinking about it as a project perspective, from a project perspective, but really looking at the suite of things over a number of years, it allows to move away from the zero-sum debate where where my gain is your loss and vice versa, to think more holistically about the long-term aspects of really achieving cooperation and beyond the water, and seeing how this can actually benefit all of us, and how you move away from this zero-sum thinking to a positive sum thinking. And of course, then the sort of the conflict prevention perspective that I touched upon. Then again, going back to sort of my key aspect here in the presentation today, I want to highlight the CIWA program, and I won't read the program development objective, but it really is focused on the provision of support to countries and regions coming together in their efforts to improve cooperative management and development for climate resilience on their either rivers or shared aquifers or lakes. It's a 15-year-old program, 15-year-long program. It's been running for a little more than 10 years, so we have another 5 years to go. It may be extended. We're still in discussions about that. It was targeting 200 million in the beginning. We raised about 141, almost all of which have been either already put to use or are in the plans to be put to use. And I think this is an important aspect, is what we call, so again, apologies for the World Bank language here, but we call it recipient executed. And that's just to say that when it's recipient executed, it's the regional organization in the African countries that are really using the resource and implementing it according to a plan. It's not the World Bank that sits on the money. It's the recipients, the partner organizations, such as the Niger Basin Authority, the Nile Basin Initiative, and so on and so forth, and some of the regional economic communities as well. As well as civil society organizations. So they are really sitting upon the implementation of this, and they've been doing so successfully over the last few years. Sometimes we bring in so to sort of catalyze and support sort of World Bank particular expertise on things, but those are more smaller parallel investments to those aspects. And sometimes we also, if it's deemed that the sort of the cooperative potential and the capacity to start a recipient executed project may not be there, we may come in and support early development of that, and then with a view to moving that and graduating that into a recipient executed support. So that's really how it's working, and you can see on the map here where we are broadly engaged in the region. And here are some of the sort of more sustained engagement over the years. We call them priority basins. This was agreed some 10 years ago that we would particularly focus on these ones. So these are 4 of the ones that we've been focusing on. We later added also Lake Chad to those 4, recognizing in part that this is important to focus on, not least given the fragile context in the Lake Chad area, both from a sort of socio-political conflict perspective, but also in terms of sort of the environmental aspects and water aspects of that particular region. And here we really have developed over the years quite a good, let me rephrase it. We have not developed, we have supported the development of the capacity to work together, the capacity to advance investments. I am traveling, as you were saying, Agnes, in the beginning. Last week I was in Rwanda, and I visited one of those investments that the World Bank has been supported through the CIWA program, but also before that through the Nile Basin Trust Fund. And it's actually now a World Bank supported project. It's a cooperative project on the tributary to the Nile River, the Kagera, on the border between Rwanda and Tanzania, and it's a run-of-the-river hydroelectric plant that is really soon to be inaugurated. It will generate energy, 80 megawatts, so it's not massive, but important, for Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania, which will really help to provide energy security, electrification, which is so much needed, for aspects that is not only related to industries and so on and so forth, but it's related to having children being able to read in the dark and do their homework. So I think if you think about that perspective, this is really something that has been possible to advance through the sustained support and long-term perspective that we've been fortunate to engage with the countries on. So that's really one out of many examples that we've been supporting over the years. Actually, here it comes. This is the top one that I was just highlighting. So we really think about the way we're supporting. We call it the 3 I's. We focus on infrastructure or investments, institutions, and then information. And that's really often what most of our projects are focused in, given the context, of course, in various ways on. But we believe that it's important to have functioning institutions in the management of regional resources. It's also important to build the information base. Often it's not there, or it is scattered among different institutions that may not be regional level. It could be universities and so on and so forth. And through the support that we're able to bring in, the countries are then, or the regional institutions are then able both to develop, but also to collect and provide the sort of the platform for this information to be shared. Because it's important to share information if you want to jointly and cooperatively develop the resource. It's important for me, if I'm in one country, to know what is happening in the other country, and vice versa, etc. And then, of course, investment that really brings the more tangible benefits to the people of those countries, and really highlight that sort of important aspect of support as well. These are just some figures. Won't go into details, but these are based on our methodology that we've always, of course, tried to track the results to make sure that we're not just investing in a process that's not leading necessarily to something concrete. But these are some of the figures that comes from the latest annual report that actually is also available on the website, so you can look more into this. And again, it's the 3 I's, the investments, the information, and the institutions that are really the focus here. What we're also doing is that we try to sort of support and encourage thematic priorities. Some of this I have talked about already, but an important part has always been, and it's only going to increase, the sort of the climate resilience. How can we support climate resilience in the region through these types of support that we already have, and those that we will be supporting in the future? Because this is really what the region is asking for. It's one of those mega challenges that needs to be addressed through transboundary water management support, but of course through a range of other support types as well. And then the fragility, conflict, and violence, the sort of the hotspots. And as you can see here, we're working in 17 out of 20 FCV situations in Africa, and supporting this very much. We recognize, in recognition of that, this is something we need to work more increasingly on. We all are also developing a new framework to do this a bit more coherently and systematically going forward as well. Another important aspect that we believe is actually going to spur development and make it even better is the gender and social inclusion aspect. We've developed a framework, and we're working together with the different basin organizations, the regional economic communities, in making sure that this is sort of permeating and is integrated in everything we're supporting. Because we believe, and I think research also tells us, if, for example, women are involved in transboundary agreements or in agreements between countries in general, the sustainability of the agreements are more robust. They last longer, basically. This perhaps shouldn't come as a surprise, but at the same time, it seems like it's doing that. The inclusion of all aspects, and it's not only women, but it's all different social groups. If all those interests are recognized and taken into account when countries both develop plans, agreements, and so on and so forth, it's sort of it's a given that they will be more sustainable, because it's taken into account all those different aspects and views, at least in theory, that you would get from a more inclusive perspective. So I think this is something that we are not only promoting, but really working together with the different actors that we're supporting to make sure that this is permeating what they're doing. Another aspect, which of course is, I wouldn't say the poor cousin, but gets a little too little attention, is the biodiversity aspect. Well, everyone talks about climate, but biodiversity also has its own conference of parties. And I think looking at the big transboundary systems in Africa, noting that they're covering more than half of the continent, of course they are directly as well as indirectly relating to important ecosystems in Africa. I think this is true globally as well, but focusing on Africa, it's really important to see how this links in. And I think this is something that we, as the World Bank, is trying to develop further. We developed a sort of a framework last year, but I think we need to be more cognizant of how we can take those considerations into aspects in the support that we're providing. And I think it's also important and incumbent on the regional organizations to think a bit more about this as well. So this is an important area that we're trying to mainstream as much as possible. Then finally, the digital data, disruptive technology, as we called it. Not only are we supporting sort of data information being generated in a more traditional way, but we're trying to help and support the regional organizations to work and make use of remote sensing and those technologies, and that data that is already available through global public and also not public, but mainly public information to inform decision making at a much better level. So we're supporting the river basin organizations, the regional economic communities to both help generate, but also manage and share and include in the decision making and joint planning, both for cooperative plans, for investments, and so on, to make better use of that data. So that's an important thing that we're trying to highlight as well. And I will just finalize, getting to the end of the presentation here. We did a midterm evaluation recently, looking at really the positive aspects of the CIWA program. And overall, it was a positive evaluation. It reinforced the high relevance, clear value add, and that it actually helps in flexible support to fragile countries and informs investments and so on and so forth. So that's really what works well. And then there were a couple of areas where we could improve, both the communication aspects, and one challenging aspect is the financial sustainability of partner organizations. The river basin organizations are often donor dependent, not fully, but partly. So we're on a positive trend there where countries are supporting them much more than they did in the past, at least, but something we can improve on and so on and so forth. I think I'll stop there, and I would be very happy to engage in discussion and respond to questions as best I can. So I'll hand it back to you, Agnes. Thank you very much. And actually, just before I do that, here you have both the Twitter handle, but also the website that I encourage you to take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jägerskog, for that very informative and inspiring presentation. Yeah, I've got a few questions here that were sent to me via the chat box. Perhaps we can start on the transboundary aquifers. One question about well, the management of transboundary aquifers are getting increasingly more important, but also more difficult to manage compared to surface water resources. How do you see the management of transboundary aquifers being managed? And do you have good examples of groundwater basin organizations which have worked successfully?
Yes, thank you very much. A great question. It's correct, increasingly important. So let me sort of take a step back in terms of both the information and the data we have on, if you compare on rivers compared to groundwater systems, you know, it's quite different. I think we have much less adequate information on aquifers, but also transboundary aquifers. So I think there is an information gap that needs to be overcome. There are efforts, global efforts, as well as national and regional, to overcome that. So I think that's an important part, to have sort of a jointly agreed information on whichever aquifer you're thinking about working together on. So that's one. The information needs to be much more. So I think there is a lot of sort of research, well, from universities and others, that needs to be encouraged. On the aspect of good examples, well, as I said, there are only actually, you know, about a handful of agreements on transboundary groundwater system, quite different from the one if we look at rivers and lakes. One example is from the Latin America region, around the Guarani aquifer. So that's one that's been working. The countries have come together. I don't know the details there, but that's one of those that are generally highlighted as a positive example. Some exciting ones from Africa is the Senegalese Mauritania aquifer, where the countries actually came together recently during the World Water Forum in Dakar in March. It was highlighted and discussed, and they have come together and asked a number of international partners, including the World Bank and CIWA, to help support them in advancing this framework. So it's quite exciting. I wouldn't say it's under development, but it's one of the few examples in Africa where it's working. I mean, those are some of the examples as well. You know, another one from Middle East, the Saudi Arabia and Jordan are sharing an aquifer called the DC aquifer, which is in the south of Jordan, north of Saudi Arabia, and it's a fossil aquifer. And you know, often in these cases, agreements, in similar cases, I should say, agreements do not exist. But these countries have come together to agree on how to utilize that and agree on a sort of regime for how to manage it, you know, how much to pump and so on and so forth. So that's another positive example. But there are far and few between, I must say, but the focus needs to increase it. And we're working, and I didn't highlight that, with both in the Horn of Africa and trying to get countries working together on groundwater, but also in the Southern Africa region, supporting the regional economic communities there, SADC, to improve groundwater management. So those are sort of things that are in progress, but much more can be done. Back to you.
Okay, great. And I've got a lot more questions here. Maybe going back to Africa and river basin organizations in Africa. One question basically is saying river basin organizations, especially in Africa, is often very fragile due to their position between countries without a real mandate. Often we see a large dependency of donor funds to ensure sustainability of the river basin organizations. How do you see that river basin organizations can generate revenue to ensure the long-term sustainability of river basin organizations, especially in Africa?
Excellent point and excellent questions. And I do agree, yes. And I think I highlighted that a little bit. The dependency on donor financing is high. And so, well, some of the RBOs actually have more of a sort of stronger mandate, excuse me, than some of the others, because they might be anchored within a regional economic community, which has, you know, an international agreement and so on and so forth. So there are a few examples of those. But that said, they are often donor dependent. But I think what we, as a positive example, let me take the Nile Basin Initiative, where there's an agreement between the countries that they should provide in a sort of an annual fee to a certain level, which, you know, if all would be able to contribute that one, which hasn't always happened because of conflicts and other things, but it is happening to some extent, it would sort of provide for the basic functions of the RBO to continue to function. So that's a positive example, and I think what we've seen is an increase in the country's financing to that. But then again, the big projects and so on are supported in the case of the Nile Basin Initiative either by CIWA or by the Germans and by the EU. And there are some other supporters as well, but those would be the main ones in that particular case. Generating revenue, there are not too many good examples of this, but one way that some of the actors, river basin organizations are thinking about is to take a fee for when they develop an investment. They do the pre-feasibility and feasibility study. If that is being picked up by the countries or the set of the countries, then that would generate a fee back to them if it's picked up. So that's one way of doing it. Another one is for and the example here. I don't know all the details, but in the Senegal case, the OMVS, which is the river basin organization there, the countries there co-own the infrastructure, and that actually does generate revenue, and some of that goes back to the RBO. So they have a model that seems to be working at least better than many of the other ones. That's another example. If the RBO could either own, which may be a stretch, or at least through the countries, if the countries collectively own it, have an agreement that they will send back some of the revenues that may come from hydropower and so on and so forth. That's another possibility. Back to you.
Okay, and then given your expertise on building effective cooperation in international waters in Africa, do you think the Africa experience might offer lessons for Asia?
But thank you for that question. I think it's a very good question. The African experiences, and we've been engaged as the World Bank for quite some time there. Some of the aspects relating to sort of institution building and so on and so forth are relatively advanced, at least in some parts of Africa. So there are lessons to be learned there, I believe. I know that we've been supporting through our work, for example, in Afghanistan earlier, the sort of exchange between the different river basin organizations or actors working on transboundary waters and those in Africa. So we've already arranged a few exchanges, both in person as well as otherwise, between Asian organizations or people working on transboundary waters and those in Africa. But at the same time, there are also strong organizations already existing in Asia that vice versa could also inform some of the African perspectives. Back to you.
Thank you. And so we have some countries as joint managers do potentially have contradicting interests. So how do you, the World Bank, manage joint managers? How do you get them to work together? What is the role of the World Bank?
Okay, another very good question. I mean, generally the way the World Bank works is we are responding to requests from countries or set of countries. Those are our clients. We would not go in if we don't have the request from the countries. That's a basic rule. You know, we're a membership-owned organization. So in that sense, that's the way we work. At the same time, of course, when you're working, you know, for example, in the Nile or in other places, the interest of countries will naturally not always align. But I think looking back at the history of support as well, the fact that we've been able to highlight the sort of the joint interests, the perspectives that actually comes out of moving away a little bit from this zero-sum thinking and building that social capital. I think that's something that helps in moving this cooperative process forward. But really, it's the countries through the different governance mechanisms. Again, let's take the Nile as an example. They have different type of, they have a Nile Council of Ministers, they have a Nile Technical Advisory Committee, and really that's where the disagreements, if there are disagreements, are supposed to be hammered out. The World Bank rarely comes in there. It's not our mandate to do that. It's really between the countries. We are supporting the cooperative management and development, but really we respond to the country. So that's the way we're doing it. And if the countries would ask us, you know, can you help us in understanding this better? You know, if it's relating to a particular question, so of course we can bring in technical expertise that can support that. So I think that's where it's coming. But the bottom line is always it's at the request of the countries. It's not the World Bank's role to knock heads together, if I use that term. On the contrary, it's the countries that are supposed to work together and find a common way, and we're happy to support that if the countries would like us to.
Thank you for that. Perhaps some question on, you know, in your experience, is there a cooperation model or arrangement which produces an optimum outcome? For example, high levels of cooperation between riparian states, like collective management of the river, transboundary river resources in terms of water quality preservation and disaster risk management. Is there one model or an arrangement that you've come across which produces that optimum outcome?
Thank you very much. I think that's also a great question. I think my take on this, excuse me, is that there is really no blueprint in this. Everything is context specific. So I think that's my sort of entry point here. At the same time, you know, having said that, there are a few principles and a few areas where I think our collective experience and the stock taking that we did internally, looking at really the World Bank support to transboundary water management over the last 20 years. We did that last year or last couple of years. It speaks to the aspects that I actually highlighted in the presentation. If you work on the 3 I's, the sort of investment angle, the information angle, and the institutional angle, if the countries are interested in working on those collectively, I think that produces a pretty good sort of thread of things where you tie things together nicely. If you only focus on, say, institutions without investments, without information, you know, it can only go so far. But if you take these 3 together, you're actually able to, you know, in my view and in our experience, a stronger outcome. And that actually speaks both to sort of often the development need of the country. And, you know, if you want to invest in a particular, you know, say that there is a hydropower plant or, you know, an irrigation scheme, etc., you do need the information to be able to take a good decision on how to advance that. So that is connected. That's how information comes into that particular investment. And also, equally important, if you don't have the institutions where the countries can come together and really hash out the details of whatever investment is being planned and, you know, negotiate, discuss, look at different options, then you also miss an important part. So I think those three coming together is quite important. And I think if anything, I would like to highlight those. But really, again, it's not a it's not like a silver bullet. You need to take into account the particular, you know, socio-political development context that you are operating in. Over.
Okay. I've got a question on strengthening institutions for transboundary water management in Africa. A question about when evaluating CIWA, the observation was countries sit on their own data since these data are strategic. The RBOs are only having their convening power when conflicts arise and the option of being a project platform. OMVS Senegal was the only exception. Do you agree?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, of course, true. The aspect of data, and of course, I think that it differs a little bit between different regions. But overall, you know, data is and information is power in a way. And of course, countries may be, specifically if there is not a strong institution or history of cooperation, they will be, and naturally so, more reluctant to share information. So yes, that I agree with. I think what we are trying to also show is that actually quite a bit of the information is already out there through public sources, you know, through satellites and so on and so forth. So there is much more information available through global sources, whether it's the NASA or you know, the European Space Agency, and so on and so forth, that you can actually access quite relatively easily. So that will tell you some, it won't tell you all, and it's not the same as the country level data. But I think we want to highlight also the sort of the broader perspectives and what resources that countries and regional institutions can tap into. But again, yes, I think it's true that this is challenging, and RBOs do not necessarily always get the best data from the countries, and you know, this is dependent on the context and so on and so forth. So you know, overall, I think I agree with that perspective. I think what we're trying to do is to highlight the opportunities to perhaps go a little bit beyond those aspects as well. Over.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jägerskog, for your brilliant presentation and answering all those questions. So I'd like to maybe end here. If there's anything more you'd like to say, then if not, then I'd like to basically thank Dr. Jägerskog for a very fascinating and engaging presentation, and thank you everyone for viewing today's seminar. Hope it's given you food for thought and impetus to engage in water issues going forward.